¿Qué tal? Muy buenos días. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Muy bienvenidos a
You're all
este
welcome
evento, este taller
to this
que estamos
workshop
haciendo con
that
ustedes
we are
desde
going
Suma
to
anteriores.
spend with you, and you're going
Si
to
desean,
be
tienen
with you. If you
el botón de
want,
interpretación
you can use
en
interpretation
el menú
button
inferior de su
just in the
pantalla
bottom
y
of
pueden
your
escoger el idioma
screen,
respectivo.
and you can choose
Welcome
the
all of
language
you.
you want to
You can
listen
select
to.
the interpretation button. Uh, you can find it in the bottom of the screen or the menu of the Zoom, and you can choose your preferred channel. Estamos dando la bienvenida a este
So
evento.
this
Vamos a
is the
esperar
welcome
todavía
to this
unos
event.
cuantos minutos para
We
poder
will
comenzar
still
con
wait for
la
5 minutes
presentación.
more so we can have more participants in our meeting.
Siguen sumando algunos participantes.
We
Muchas
still
gracias por
have
la
more
puntualidad.
people with us. Thank you for being
Como
here
les
with us
decía, en breves
punctually.
minutos vamos a dar
As I
inicio a
told you,
este
we will
taller.
start our
Estamos
workshop very
organizando desde
soon.
Kixlack.
This has been organized
Por el
by
momento
Kickslack.
pueden ir colocando
You
sus
can
nombres,
write your
sus roles
names in
y país
your
en la
role and your
plataforma.
country in the
Podemos
chat of the
establecer el
platform,
modo
and
de
also you
interpretación
can
en donde
also select
su
the
idioma de
interpretation
preferencia
channel
lo pueden
that you
encontrar
want to
en el
listen
menú
to,
inferior
that you
de la
will find at
pantalla.
the bottom of the page.
Vamos a iniciar en breves minutos. Muchas gracias.
And we'll start shortly. Thank you so much.
¿Qué tal? Muy buenos días. Estamos a breves minutos de empezar este
We
taller
Good morning. We're going to start very
organizado por
soon.
Kixlack.
This was organized by Kickslack.
Además de ir seleccionando el canal de interpretación de
Please
su
choose the
preferencia,
interpretation channel that you may
solamente
want to
estamos esperando también
listen
que
to.
puedan
And
presentarse
remember that we
desde
are
el chat de
waiting
la
for you
plataforma.
to
Pueden ir
introduce
colocando
yourselves in the
su
chat. You can
nombre,
write your
la
names,
institución o
the
país del que
institution
representan
or the
y
country you
el rol
represent,
que ustedes
and your
interpretan en el taller.
role in
Muchas
those
gracias. En breves
institutions.
minutos
Thank you so much.
iniciamos.
Shortly we will start.
Bien, nuevamente agradecemos mucho
We
por la
thank you
puntualidad
all
y
for being
ya se
here with
estén
us
presentando a través del chat.
and that you're
Vamos a dar
introducing
inicio
yourselves through the chat. We are
oficialmente a
going
este
to
taller. Muy
start
buenos días a todas y
our
todos.
workshop.
Me
Good
presento, soy
morning,
Pedro
everyone.
Garret,
I am Pedro Garret,
coordinador de
project
proyectos,
coordinator
investigador del
and
Kick Lab Hub,
researcher at the
y
Kixlack
tendré el
Hub,
gusto de
and
acompañarlos
I'm
en
pleased
esta
to
sesión.
join you for this
Les
session.
agradecemos que hayan
Thank you for
aceptado
accepting this
esta invitación.
invitation.
Hoy nos acompañan
Today, we are
representantes de
joined
alrededor
by
de 9 países
representatives from approximately
latinoamericanos y caribeños,
9 countries in
participar
Latin America
líderes
and the
del
Caribbean, as
gobierno,
well as various
sociedad
governments,
civil
civil
y
society,
academia,
and
lo que hace
academic
este espacio
institutions,
muy
making
enriquecedor.
this a very enriching forum.
Antes, queremos hacer unos anuncios importantes.
We'll begin shortly, but first we
En
have
esta
some
sesión
important
tendremos la versión
announcements. This session
simultánea
has
en español,
simultaneous
inglés y
interpretation in
francés.
Spanish, English,
Recuerdo que
and
podemos
French,
seleccionar su
so please
idioma
select your
en esta
language
presentación.
using the
Lo pueden
interpretation
encontrar en
button
la parte
at the
inferior de su
bottom
pantalla.
of your screen.
Si tuvieran preguntas,
If you have any
pueden
questions,
enviarlas en
you can
cualquier
send
momento a
them
través
at
del chat
any
de la
time
plataforma.
via
De
the
todas maneras,
platform's
al
chat.
tratarse pues de un taller,
As this is a
contaremos
workshop,
con momentos
we will
específicos
have
para que
specific
ustedes
times
asuman el
for you
protagonismo
to
y
take the
participen
lead and
activamente cuando se
actively
desarrolle el mismo.
participate in the exchange
En
of
estos primeros
ideas.
minutos,
In
por
these
favor,
first few
les pedimos
minutes,
que puedan colocar en
please
el chat su nombre,
include
país
your
y la
name,
escuela que representan.
country, and institution you represent in
Para
the chat.
nosotros es un gusto enorme
It is a great
darles la bienvenida a
pleasure
este
to
taller
welcome you to this
que
workshop
realizamos como parte
that
del
we are
proceso de
conducting as
comunicación de
part of the knowledge
conocimiento
mobilization
sobre el uso de
cycle
evidencia
on the
en
use
la
of
educación
evidence in
infantil en la
early
infancia,
childhood education,
impulsado desde el Kick Lab.
promoted by the Kixlack
Como
Hub.
muchos ya saben, a lo
As
largo
many
de
of you
este
already
año
know,
hemos
throughout this
venido
year we have
profundizando en una
delved
serie de
into a
desafíos y
series of
actividades
challenges and
relacionados
priorities
con la primera
related
infancia en
to
América
early
Latina y el
childhood
Caribe.
in Latin America and the
Hemos
Caribbean.
abordado desde
We
temas
have
base
addressed
estructurales como
everything from
financiamiento,
structural issues
incentivos,
such as
los
inclusive
marcos regulatorios,
financing,
la
regulatory
coordinación
frameworks,
interinstitucional,
the
aspectos
interinstitutional
más accesibles al aula,
coordination to
como
aspects
estándares de
closer
calidad
to
educativa,
classroom quality
desarrollo
standards
profesional
and
docente
curriculum,
y
teacher
prácticas
professional
pedagógicas
development,
inclusivas e
and
incluyentes.
effective and inclusive pedagogical
En este
practices.
contexto, en el que ya
In
nos
this
encontramos en
context,
cierre
as we
de este
approach
ciclo
the end of
de
this knowledge
conocimiento,
mobilization
este taller
cycle,
regional
this
tratará sobre cómo
regional workshop
accionar
will focus on how to
evidencia,
put evidence into
empleando
action,
herramientas que
using
sistematizan
tools
dicha
that
evidencia
systematize
en
this
torno a
evidence
innovaciones pedagógicas
around
y
pedagogical
prácticas
innovations
cost-efectivas
and
para la toma de
cost-effective
decisión
practices
informada en
for
educación en la
informed
infancia.
decision making in early
Seguramente
childhood
más de una vez nos
education.
hemos preguntado
We have
qué
surely asked
prácticas generan mejores
ourselves,
resultados de
what
aprendizaje,
practices generate the best
qué tan
learning
robusta es la
outcomes?
evidencia
How
detrás de
robust
ellas,
is the evidence behind them?
cuánto cuesta
How
implementarlas,
much do they cost to
cómo
implement?
traducirlas en
How can
decisiones
we translate them
realistas y
into
efectivas
realistic,
en el futuro.
equitable, and sustainable
Bueno,
decisions?
para intentar aproximarnos
So
a las
try
respuestas,
to approach
en
some
este
of the
encuentro
answers. In
vamos a
this
explorar
meeting, we'll
herramientas para
explore
conocer la evidencia
evidence-based
que
tools
orientan la
that
identificación,
guide the
evaluación,
identification, assessment,
adaptación y
adaptation,
ejecución
and
de
implementation
prácticas
of
pedagógicas
cost-effective
cost-efectivas
pedagogical
para la
practices
educación en su primera
for
infancia,
early
sobre
childhood
todo aquellas
education,
relacionadas con la
especially
mejora
those
de la
related to
conducta.
the improvement of foundational
A través de
learning.
ejemplos concretos y
Through
ejercicios
concrete examples
colaborativos,
and
se
collaborative
creará un espacio
discussion,
para
we will
reflexionar
create a
sobre la
space to
aplicabilidad de los
reflect
recursos
on the
explorados en estos
applicability of the
contextos
resources
y
explored in
pensar
our
juntos cómo
contexts
podrían
and to think
diseñarse
together about
marcos
how to
similares adaptados a nuestras
create
prioridades,
similar frameworks
capacidades y
adapted to
necesidades
our
pedagógicas.
priorities, capacities, and territorial needs.
En ese sentido,
In this
este taller busca
sense,
cerrar el año
this
compartiendo
workshop
herramientas
aims to conclude the
útiles
year by
como
sharing
insumos
useful
importantes
tools
para
as an
realizar
important
estadísticas
input for
evolutivas
developing more
más
effective,
efectivas, sostenibles y
sustainable,
basadas en
and
evidencia.
evidence-based
Para
educational
lograr este
policies.
importante propósito,
In order to
es
achieve this
fundamental
important
contar
goal,
con su
it is
participación.
fundamental to have your participation.
Precisamente, algunas de estas herramientas han sido
Some
desarrolladas
of
por
these
nuestro
tools have
aliado,
been developed
la
by our
Education
partner,
Endowment Foundation,
Education
EEF,
Endowment Foundation,
cuyas
EEF,
representantes
whose
nos están
representatives
acompañando el día de
will
hoy.
be joining
Por
us
un lado,
today.
quiero dar la
We have with
bienvenida a
us,
Amy
I want
Fox,
to welcome
quien es
Amy
Gerente
Fox,
Internacional
Senior
Senior de la
International
EEF,
Manager at
y que
EEF,
previamente
who
trabajó
previously
en el
worked at
Education
the
Policy Institute,
Education
una think tank
Policy
británica donde
Institute,
trabajó
a
colaborando
British
con el
think tank
sector
where she worked
educativo y
collaborating with the
liderando programas de educación
stakeholders across the educational
internacionales.
sector and leading
Por
corporate
otro
events
lado,
and membership
doy la
programs.
bienvenida a Sandra
On the
Keisel,
other hand, here with us
gerenta
is
de
Sandra Krexel,
Inteligencia
early childhood manager at EF, who's got a master's degree in public policy and management from the King's College in London, who previously worked at Mexicanos Primero, a renowned non-profit organization dedicated to educational policy and public advocacy. Thank you so much, Amy and Sandra, for being here with us. In this very important workshop. Now we are going to see what the agenda for this event. As I showed you in the concept note that I shared with you, after the context, Amy and Sandra will provide a regional a summary of this information of the toolkit and the relevance for the policies and practices for the early childhood education. After this toolkit discussion, we will be focused in two practices, two strengths. One is about communication and language, and the other one is about early calculation. After their presentation, it's important to listen to them, and we will listen also to your reflections on how this information can be useful in these contexts in terms of communication and language and early maths. And the EF experts will share with us some examples as case studies, including all this information. Then we will go to a second moment where you will be the leaders, and here we will work in this space about some foundational learnings in the LAC context. Here we're going to have different work groups, and we will give you the information at the right moment, and you will be the leaders of this second part. And after we have worked this, and now we are going to include this in a plenary, and we will have a final discussion in order to summarize the workshop. So, as a presentation to the workshop, we will give you a brief regional context on the use of evidence to inform initiatives and practices related to early childhood education. So it is important, and I see a lot of familiar names that you have joined us from different countries of the region. And we've been through a very long journey. So let's remember that in January from this year, we started with the launch of this knowledge mobilization cycle in the early childhood education. And we had this general review of the relevance about the policies, practices, and the most important characteristics related to these matters, such as inclusive financing, such as interinstitutional coordination or institutional capacities to perform or create these policies for the early childhood. Let's remember that we had experts from different organizations, OECD, GPD, ITRC. We had this review or general overview with UNICEF, OECS, and also we had some national cases, such as the ones presented by the representative of El Salvador, Grenada, Honduras, along with some KICS grantees and other specialists. So, as I mentioned, that was in January, and then we have had different activities, such as newsletters and KICS conversations, and other activities that we have shared with you until in the mid part of the year. We had this meeting, this regional meeting that we have on a yearly basis. This was an in-person meeting that was in Antigua, Guatemala, where we had this focus on the discussion of the foundational learnings. So that was a milestone in which we had this commitment, Antigua's commitment for the follow-up of the learning outcomes for children in the region. And then we have this final subcycle where we had this a more detailed view about things related to quality standards, the teacher training, and pedagogical practices. With us, we had some allies with us, such as UNESCO, OECD, and also representatives from EEF that we have now with us, and also we had experts from the Rasmus Foundation. Also, Dominica and Guatemala presented some examples of their cases. So there have been plenty of initiatives that we have seen, but this is a summary or an overview of what we have done and to reach this final point of this workshop and reaching almost the end of the year of this knowledge mobilization cycle in the early childhood education. Now, if we move to the next slide, it is important. You know why it is essential to use the evidence in the first childhood education. As we have detailed in other studies, or it has been detailed in different studies, having this decision-making based on the evidence is fundamental, not only at a general level, but in terms of the educational policy, but in the early childhood, it allows us to reduce equity gaps in different socioeconomic contexts, and it may guide the teachers and the policymakers in more effective interventions with scientific support and building educational systems that are more inclusive. So in order to summarize these key benefits of using evidence in the early childhood at a systemic level, it has been proved that education systems that integrate evidence from assessment into policies have shown significant progress in foundational learning, such as reading and basic mathematics. Another important point is related to the pedagogical core. The evidence strengthens the interaction between students, teachers, and the curriculum, and this has a direct impact in the crucial aspect of the educational process. This also promotes a more inclusive and effective teaching, reducing some learning gaps. And at the teaching level, the evidence allows the design of more effective strategies, just like you will see that with Amy and Sandra, by identifying which teaching methods achieve more meaningful learning outcomes and how we adapt to the particular needs of each student throughout their educational journey. If we see the next slide, it is important, and that's why this workshop collects the ideas and the initiatives that you bring, and it is very important that you share those initiatives. As you may have seen, when you fill in the information to enroll in this workshop, there were some questions, and you responded very kindly in terms of the challenges, the initiatives, and some doubts or questions that you may have about the workshop matters or subjects. Some of the aspects that you mentioned that were important to consider were related to, for example, teacher training and pedagogical strategies, how these approaches can be related to the diversity or contextualized in relation to diversity, considering inclusion, special needs, and also related to the socio-emotional support. Things related to the assessment and monitoring of learning, the role of families, the community, and some systemic factors, etc. So although Amy and Sandra will focus in two strands that are related to communication and language and early mathematics. This Early Years Toolkit has other practices that are relevant for, such as social and emotional learning strategies, parental engagement, and play-based learning, which are other things where we could deep dive. And at a global level, we have some initiatives that we have seen in this cycle of knowledge mobilization from the OECS with the Pearl program, the program for the Pearl program for the educational advance, and in a first workshop that we had in the first half of the year, along with UNICEF, we saw a tool that is called ECE, and also some other publications that from OECD and along with SUMA they have developed that are key for the teaching strategies. So if we go to the next slide, we will see that from the GPE, there are some projects related to the different hubs from KICS. So when we see the region, we want to highlight two projects that are in process. One is in El Salvador through this scaling a learning through play module for early childhood education that is being developed by the Educo Foundation and also the Pedagogical University in El Salvador. This is integrated with the Crecer Juntos Act that establishes the right to play from early childhood as a powerful tool and a very important strand in the national curriculum. And also we have another project in the context of Guatemala and Honduras, which is gender inclusive pedagogy for community level early childhood education. This has been implemented by the CLADE network and also OMEP. That is very important for the dialogic pedagogy in the school. The school is not by itself, but also they have the participation of communities in the early childhood education. This is not only from the Latin American region, but we also have other hubs. Remember that GPE KICS as a program, it also has some hubs in Africa, in Europe, in Asia Pacific, and Middle East. For example, although they have more projects, here we highlight some that are done in some Asian and African countries, such as adapting, testing, and scaling a proven summer pre-primary education model. This is in Cambodia, Laos, and Tanzania. Also, we have another project that is integrating early childhood education in sectorial planning that is done in South Sudan, Sierra Leone, and Tajikistan and Kurdistan. These last two ones, along with other projects, have been subject to analysis and synthesis of the evidence. You can see here the portrait of a study that is very important with some projects as the ones that I have mentioned, and here you can see the link that I will share with you. This is very important because it shows a synthesis of the good practices and the lessons learned in these projects that have been supported by different organizations, and it gives us some recommendations. If we move to the next slide, so to close this part, it is important to have a balance about the main challenges and recommendations for the evidence used in the early childhood education in the region. And as we have multiple challenges in the region, for example, the heterogeneity of the data systems, and also there is a gap between evidence and the decision-making process. There is a weak articulation between research, policy, and practice. There is insufficient contextualized evidence, and of course, there are gaps in the teacher's training for the use of the evidence. Also, there are some structural things such as limited funding for knowledge systems. So, as a whole, these are the prioritized challenges and that have been part of our history and that we have to tackle. Also, we have different publications and studies that have been done and present some recommendations, such as strengthening data and evaluation systems. We can have solid and interoperable information systems. Also promote the situated or located evidence that has to be used in a contextualized way, incorporating the local knowledge, integrate evidence into pedagogical core. They have to use these strategies that are based on research, and also they have to promote multisectoral partnerships, the collaboration between ministries, universities, schools. That's so important for the adoption of the evidence use, and strengthening the teacher training, and that has to include tools to use this pedagogic evidence and ensure sustainable financing. It's very important to allocate enough resources. So this is the first context. I don't want to speak much more.
Va a tratar justamente en este tránsito de la evidencia a la acción.
We are going to go from evidence to action, and now Amy and Sandra are going to talk about some pedagogical innovations that are cost-effective for education in early childhood. They are going to center Early Years Toolkit. This tool is also in a process of contextualization and a work in alliance between them and SUMA, and soon it'll be translated and in the context for our region. So now, without any more ado, I would like to welcome Amy and Sandra, representatives of EEF, who will guide us through the main contents of today's workshop. Please go ahead.
Thank you for that, Pedro. I'm just sharing my screen. Can you see my screen?
Perfecto, Amy. Se ve muy bien.
We see it perfectly.
Fab. So yeah, hi everybody. I'm Amy Foe, and as Pedro so nicely introduced, I work at the Education Endowment Foundation. And it's really great to see some of the familiar names on the screen from the workshop we had back in Guatemala earlier this year. Some of you in the audience might remember me as the woman bitten by a dog. But yeah, it's really great to be with you all again and to be able to continue this really, really important conversation on how we are embedding evidence in early childhood education. We know this is an area where we can make a huge difference to the lives of children and young people. So yeah, really pleased this is on the agenda for the network. And yeah, before I get going with the presentation, just to share that a lot about my role at the EEF, which is a evidence centre based in England, is really about kind of supporting other systems to contribute and to use our database of international evidence. So yeah, I'll be talking to you about the section of that database today that really relates to early childhood. So yeah, to introduce the Early Years Toolkit, I wanted to start off by addressing, like, what's the point of having a toolkit? What is it essentially? And for us, for our definition, toolkits are really high-level summaries of all available evidence linked to a specific research question or questions. So they are resources that are broad rather than deep and essentially provide a gateway to the evidence base. And when I say all available evidence, what I mean is that we are looking for that evidence, those studies, those research papers, in a way which is systematic in a process called systematic review. And this means that before we start searching for studies, we are defining and specifying what types of studies we will include. And this means that we are then able to summarize all available evidence on a topic area, and not just the studies that we know or the studies that we like or the studies that a friend or a colleague have recommended to us. So that way, we're actually removing bias from the process as much as possible. And then finally, why have a toolkit or a resource like this? So we know that policymakers and practitioners need evidence to support their decision making, but that evidence is often, it's hard to find, it's behind paywalls, and it can be really time consuming and costly to review and find these studies. And these studies actually are also not typically written with that end user in mind. So typically written in really technical language and, you know, not written with the intention of use. And the benefit of having a toolkit is that rather than having to look for studies and research in multiple places, you have it instead in this one go-to place as a public good. And I know, you know, one of the intentions of this network is to really support access to public goods like toolkits and so on. So the Early Years Toolkit, it is an accessible summary of 450 impact studies in early childhood education even. And the EEF version, we have context-specific information for those educators and those policymakers in England. But we're really excited about SUMA's plans to develop a version which is similarly tailored, but for your context in Latin America and the Caribbean. The toolkit has 10 different themes. So these are really kind of broad approaches right across early childhood education. Some of them more focused around pedagogy, and some of them more about how you might organize a school, let's say. And the two that we will be zooming in a bit more on today are communication and language, and also early numeracy. But we know and recognize that there is also a lot of interest in some of these other areas, for example, early literacy. And then actually, you know, when you are an early childhood educator or a policymaker in this space, you want to be able to support a broad range of outcomes when supporting early childhood development. So actually, communication and language, that would really support, you know, those important foundational skills to help develop some of those early literacy skills. And similarly, one of the other strands we have is physical development, let's say. And we know that it's really important to start supporting children to develop gross motor skills so they can develop fine motor skills, so they can hold a pencil, and then also supporting, those really key early literacy skills as well. And a bit of a kind of myth busting on the Early Years Toolkit. So what it is, it's a accessible summary of 450 impact studies. It's really like an overview of studies, so it's not a deep dive. It's really a starting point for professional conversations or policy initiatives. It's really not designed to be a replacement for the expertise that you have about your systems or the expertise from your careers or that local knowledge or context. It's really just this beginning point of a conversation. And I like this one. So it's a history of what has worked. The professor that developed the toolkit calls researchers historians. So we really have to have our kind of historian hat on when looking at this toolkit and really understand, using that professional judgment, whether or not the evidence in it is relevant to us and is of the right quality for us. And then what it is not. So it's not a summary of all early childhood evidence. We don't have, much of that really important kind of qualitative evidence from your systems, for example, in it. And hopefully, the work of SUMA will really add that richness, and as well as, the different discussions and projects that you'll have today in your rooms that could also add inspiration for what other evidence you feel like might complement a resource like this. It's not a how-to guide. So again, really emphasizing that it shouldn't just be taken at face value. It should be used alongside professional judgment. Again, not a substitute for that professional judgment. And yes, with this resource, there are no kind of guarantees. So really encourage when the toolkit evidence is embedded into projects that kind of careful implementation, monitoring and evaluation strategies are put in place. So you have that kind of live feedback on whether or not these approaches are working in your context. So some key features of the resource. For each of those 10 different themes, we have what are called kind of headlines. And we focus in these headlines in giving information, which is really important, we feel, for policymakers and for school leaders on how much these approaches are likely to cost. The evidence security of the approach. So how many studies are there? How similar are these studies to each other? How old or current is that evidence base? And then finally, and importantly, also information on average, how many months progress are children in receipt of this approach likely to make in comparison to those that didn't. So they're kind of plus 2 months here shown on your screen. Then once you kind of click into the toolkit and you go to each strand, there is much more kind of detail on what the approach is, the key findings, how effective the approach is, any further information we have about how you might really use that approach to address education inequities, particularly in your system. Really important information on implementation. And we usually, I should say, we write these summaries in conjunction with our evidence users. So in conjunction, let's say, with educators or with policymakers. So we're really understanding how to bridge that evidence base to actually what's happening on the ground. And then finally, just like a deeper dive into how much the approach might cost, and again, how secure that evidence base is. And this is just a snapshot of how that looks on the page. And then just to summarize, before I hand over to Sandra to give a bit more of a deep dive onto those two specific strands, the Early Years Toolkit really is a summary of best bets based on what has worked and not a guarantee. It's not a substitute for your professional judgment. And yeah, really excited to be involved in some of the discussions today about how it might complement that judgment. You should really consider those headlines together. So it can be like a temptation just to kind of, filter and maybe kind of look for the approach which has the biggest impact. But, that same approach actually, might have really weak evidence behind it, or it might be too costly to implement. It's really important to go into the detail of each strand and not just look at those headlines. So again, Sandra's presentation on that detail will be really important. And then finally, yes, it's just really a starting point for our discussion. So yeah, without further ado, I'm handing over to Sandra to talk about communication and language.
Thank you, Amy, for that very thorough presentation. And yeah, I think very important to keep in mind everything that sort of Amy covered around the toolkit, because that all applies to every single strand. And I'm going to do a very quick sort of overview of what the communication and language strand has. But again, the invitation is for you to, one, go directly to the toolkit to see it from the source and get all of the information it has, and also to remember that this is just a starting point. So when making decisions around what interventions programs to adopt in your contexts, in your jurisdictions, it's important to go deeper, find other sources, and complement this resource with more evidence, expertise, professional experience, etc. So if we can go to the next slide. Amy, thank you. As you'll remember from a couple of slides above, here are the headlines. According to the review conducted for the toolkit, communication and language approaches have very high impact, almost 7 months, or on average 7 months, for a very low cost based on moderate evidence. And we'll unpick that as we go on. But for you to remember, or the key aspects to think about, is that communication and language approaches involve educators intentionally acting to develop young children's understanding and ability to use language and other strategies like nonverbal language to communicate effectively. They are based on the idea that children's language development benefits from approaches that support communication through talking and other types of expression. The intentionality is important. Understanding why and how these approaches support early language and communication development helps professionals understand how to use them and how to meet the individual needs of children in their care. Educators play an important role not only in adopting the approaches, but also early identification of communication and language difficulties or needs. But to do this, educators have to have the right skills and training. If you're thinking about incorporating communication and language approaches in your context, as we said, it's important to look behind the average and think how this evidence presented in the toolkit can be applied in your context. What does this include? It includes approaches that support the linguistic aspect of communication, such as teaching and modeling vocabulary and language. Approaches that support both the cognitive and the linguistic aspects of communication, such as interactive reading or collaborative talk, engaging in conversation. And approaches that support the physical aspects of communicating, such as social communication skills. I'm going to go to the next slide. Here are the key findings, and these are, again, the the generalizable recommendations found across all the studies reviewed. And the first one is, go back to the headlines. These approaches have a very high impact and increase children's learning on average by 7 months. The second one is that positive effects have been identified on early language and literacy skills. Amy made this link at the beginning of her presentation. Communication and language and early literacy are linked. So when selecting strategies, it's important to consider what outcomes you're looking for, and it's very likely that you'll need to adopt approaches from both strands. And there is an early literacy strand on the toolkit that you can go to. In order to implement this type of approaches, staff are likely to benefit from specific training or professional development. And there are many approaches for teaching and developing young children's communication and language. High quality provision will likely involve multiple approaches delivered together and supporting vocabulary, language, talk, and social communications. Next slide, please. And how effective are these approaches? This is a bit looking behind the headlines. The evidence consistently shows that communication and language approaches improve young children's learning, particularly their spoken language, their expressive vocabulary, and their early reading skills. Again, this link to early reading. The evidence shows all children benefit from these approaches, but some studies do show slightly larger gains for those from disadvantaged backgrounds. So communication and language approaches can be a way of closing that disadvantage gap, which is, I think, of interest to all of us here today. The evidence says that some approaches appear to be more effective than others. One of the strongest and consistent evidence behind this approach is for interactive reading, what we refer to as interactive reading, shared reading, dialogic reading. And this is when you read with young children, educators read with young children and encourage them to answer questions, talk about the story, and expand vocabulary based on that story. The other approach that showed strong and consistent evidence is those programs that involve teaching assistants. So not only the teachers, but also teaching assistants supporting implementation of communication language approaches. The importance of professional development and training for those educators delivering this approach is consistent, and this idea of using more than one approach. And just to cover the basics, the evidence base is strong in the United Kingdom, and we had evaluation of a program called Nuffield Early Language Intervention that found a positive impact of 4 months additional progress for children, which is one of our, it's an evaluation that we at the Education Endowment Foundation funded, and is one of the examples that we have as one of the most promising programs, interventions for children. So that sort of backs up the overall impact. And just to flag, while the evidence is fairly consistent across different environments, we know less about the long-term impact. So there's further research needed on how to sustain benefits once children start the later stages in school. And the last slide for this presentation part is a few other things to keep in mind. Again, the nuances behind the general findings and key findings is important. Almost all studies measure language or early reading outcomes, and they show consistently positive results across nurseries and other types of early years provision in primary schools. As you probably will know from your own context, how early childhood education is delivered changes in countries and has different types of settings. So the evidence behind this strand shows consistent positive effects across whatever type of setting they are. So that's positive as well. While the evidence base spans 8 countries, most studies come from the United States, and these tend to show slightly larger effects than those from other countries, so important to keep in mind context. And also a flag to be careful to match approaches with the needs of children. Determining what the needs of children are is a very important first step in determining what approaches you will then like to implement. And also mentioned is the importance of getting a specialist when there is a child struggling with vocabulary or social communication. Important to get that specialist knowledge as well. And in terms of implementation, the toolkit emphasizes that matching approaches to children's needs is important, linking spoken language to early literacy approaches to make it more effective, combining strategies rather than relying on just one, and ensuring staff are supported and trained on the specific intervention or program. Costs, as you will remember from that headline slide, are very generally low, but if settings invest in books or professional development, they might go up. And evidence security is rated as moderate, given there is a good number of studies, 66, but not all of the evaluations were independent. That's a really quick overview of what the strand says. And now it's time for you all to have a bit of reflections. And if we can go to the next slide, maybe. Sorry, I included this slide and then forgot about it. Basically, this is a quick reminder on what Amy explained at the beginning on how communication, language, and early literacy are linked. And we developed this model called the reading house that you can see on the bottom left part of the slide, which has sort of all the parts that make up reading comprehension, how children, young people achieve that reading comprehension, and there's building blocks. And those building blocks span across both early literacy approaches and communication and language. You need both to build that house. So understanding them as a set is important, but also in their individualness, they need to be sort of complete approaches delivered independently so that children have all of them together to build this house. And now I think we can go on to reflections. And these questions were recommended by the team at KICS and should help sort of guide the next few minutes. I think we have around 10 to get sort of your views on how in your context you could benefit from the information included in this Early Years Toolkit, remembering sort of the principles behind the toolkit. And the second question is, how could the evidence from this strand be used to inform initiatives in your country or jurisdiction? And I think now people sort of can come off mute on the chat.
Sí, muchas gracias, Sandra. Sí, para estimular un poco la participación.
Thank you so much, Sandra. So that we all participate, we have written here in the platform chat the questions that you have shared with us related to this trend. And as this is a workshop, they can open their mic and also they can send a message on the chat to some of the answers to the questions that we have written in the chat. So in the particular context of our guest, what do you think could benefit you from the information included in this early childhood toolkit? And how could we use the data from this section of communication and language in order to inform the initiatives in your country? So as this is a workshop, please exchange information. Raúl, you have raised your hand. Thank you so much, Sandra and Amy,
for the presentation. I'm going to speak in Spanish.
Thank you to all the participants. I've seen familiar faces and new faces. It's always interesting to acknowledge that KICS Hub is updated or we receive new people. I just wanted to highlight, of course, the relevance of the work presented. We have an alliance. We have had it for many years with the EF, And we acknowledge the importance of the work that has been done, not only of synthesizing the evidence, but mobilizing it as well. So on one side, based on the synthesis, I wanted to highlight the importance that was mentioned by Amy and Sandra, the importance of contextualizing the work that is being done in the region. So we have to acknowledge what Amy mentioned about the importance of having the qualitative and quantitative evidence that exists in our countries, and that's part of the work that we do in SUMA. Here we have part of the SUMA team that work in the contextualization processes of this toolkit provided by the tool. So I see researchers from different countries, from Honduras and other countries. So it will be very interesting to have this information about what's the evidence that we have or that we do not have, so we can talk about these results, because there is a conversation that is a starting point when we say, for example, that we have a great amount of studies and impact assessments that inform about the effective strategies, but we also have to acknowledge that we should consider the production and also the mapping of the existing research that there is in the region. There is a rich tradition of research in education in the early childhood, in the preschool education, that would allow us to think about the importance of the foundational learnings. And here we talk about the importance of education, of communication, language, and mathematics, as you saw that in the early childhood toolkit. It also considers the other foundational aspects that are in the discussion, such as socio-emotional learnings, early literacy, among others. I see here that Elma was writing something, a comment. Elma, you may read that, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about your comment. Hi, Elma. Please introduce yourself. I am Elma Barahona from Honduras, from the National Pedagogical University. Very interesting what you have just shown you, because this is one of the work areas in my case as I work in the Pedagogical University. And when I see this work, who could receive a benefit? We could receive a benefit as a university, also the Autonomous National University in Honduras that has this permanent training for teachers, and also the Education Secretary and other organizations that work in the early childhood education. And this proposal about how you are organizing the evidence, how the evidence shows, for example, how it contributes to the achievement in the early childhood learning outcomes. And I think it's a great tool to organize these learning outcomes. I think it is wonderful that SUMA is also going to do the translation for the contextualization in the Latin American and the Caribbean, and that will provide tools so we can work in the contextualization in Honduras and how we organize the evidence that we have. Because what usually happens is that there is the stakeholders that are part of this ecosystem are separated. There are researchers on one side, also the policymakers on another side, the users on another side. So this type of work helps to integrate all that ecosystem, and it tunes like us, so it helps us moving us from evidence to action. I'm talking from the Honduras context. Thank you so much for this and we will follow the work that you're doing so we can bring this to our country and learn and share this with the other stakeholders.
Muchísimas gracias, Elma.
Thank you so much, Elma.
Muchas gracias por ese punto de vista de integración.
Thank you for that point of view about integration, about the things that you do in the education secretary, from the academia, from the ministries. That's important.
No sé si algún invitamos, ¿no? Así como Elma.
So, as Elma, is there any other person who would like to share and open their microphone, their camera, and maybe give us another impression based on what Sandra and Amy have shared?
Hemos dejado también las preguntas en el chat.
So we have here the questions in the chat as well.
No, we can continue with the presentation. Maybe more information will give them more inspiration.
Claro, quizás Sandra, continuamos con la parte que tiene que ver más
Yes,
con...
let's continue with this part related with the early mathematics, and then we will have another moment for the participants' participation. Please go on. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Amy. Okay, so we're also covering early numeracy, and if you can go to the next slide, Amy. Again, the first thing is the headlines. What do we know? What does the toolkit tell us about early numeracy approaches? It's very similar to communication and language. We picked two good ones for you. High impact for very low cost, although this one has a bit of limited evidence, so not as many studies, although the studies do show promising impact, as you can see. What is it? Early numeracy approaches aim to develop number skills and improve young children's knowledge and understanding of early mathematical concepts. Activities in this area might be structured, for example, those designed to develop children's number sense, which is their understanding of quantity and number. What is a 3? How does 3 look? Or more informal, such as using mathematical games, including computer games and play activities involving counting or using mathematical language, other forms of mathematical language. The next slide. The key findings for early numeracy are, again, first one is about impact. Early numeracy approaches typically increase children's learning by about 7 months. Approaches supporting the development of early numeracy skills and knowledge can have an important positive impact on the early stages of mathematical learning. So very important for those building blocks, again, that take children throughout their school journey. Another important key finding is that targeted early numeracy approaches may help children from disadvantaged backgrounds catch up with their peers by the beginning of formal schooling. So another good disadvantage gap closer. The fourth key finding is that it's particularly important to teach, whenever possible, the full breadth of the mathematics curriculum, where numeracy focused solely on number operations or math as a supplementary activity, impacts were lower. So looking across the mathematical curriculum rather than the pieces or the small chunks. And fifth, professional development may be particularly important in early numeracy. Professionals' knowledge of mathematics and of young children's development in mathematics support early mathematics learning. And can we go to the next slide? In terms of how effective are early numeracy approaches, the evidence tells us that on average, they have a positive impact equivalent to 7 months additional progress. There is some variation across approaches, which highlights how important it is to choose the right one, and introduced strategies, pedagogical strategies, in a considered way. Studies show that approaches tend to have larger effects or larger impact when they cover the full breadth of the maths curriculum, commit to a regular amount of time each week, and educators keep coming back to it, are designed specifically for the setting, based on the needs of that setting, and include some individual interaction with children, so both whole group and targeted approaches. The most effective approaches balance guided interaction with direct teaching and child-led activities. So across that teaching continuum, where teachers are very much involved, less involved, and children are learning and developing skills by themselves. This balance shift depends on the child's age and level of understanding. And several studies emphasize that early years professionals need a solid understanding of young children's mathematical development, including their learning stage and how to assess them. This supports better decision-making and more effective activities. I paused a bit at the last slide because I was thinking about one of another really emblematical programs that we funded, early maths pedagogical intervention called Math Champions. And a big focus of that program is on building educators' confidence around mathematical skills. And that has proven to have very positive impact on children's learning. So making sure the educators themselves have the right knowledge, skills, and confidence in teaching that is as important as the approaches themselves. And for the last slide, before we go into a more interactive part, again, important to keep in mind the nuances. Studies show that early numeracy approaches have positive effects in different types of early year settings. So impact spans across different types of settings that we're used to in England. Approaches that use digital technology are generally as effective as those that do not. Complete curriculum approaches tend to be more impactful than when math is delivered as an add-on or as individual things. Evidence comes from 10 countries, but there's relatively limited evidence in English settings. Approaches tend to have a larger impact for children from disadvantaged background, and targeted support may help them catch up by the start of formal schooling. Effective implementation involves balancing individual, small group, and guided instruction, dedicating regular time to numeracy, being clear about the skills each activity develops, monitoring impact, and crucially preparing and training staff. Costs are usually low for these approaches and increasing as investing in professional development or equipment is needed, similar to communication and language in this way. And the evidence security for this strand is limited, mainly because relatively few studies exist and many were not independently evaluated. Variation between types of approaches and multiple components in those approaches and interventions makes it harder to identify the core features that are generalizable findings of effective programs. And finally, the reminder that the toolkit summarizes average impacts from academic studies. So it's important always when you're thinking about implementing early maths or early numeracy approaches in your context to apply your professional judgment. And that's the final sort of presentation slide from this part. So again, open to you for any reflections on how you could benefit from the information in the toolkit in your context, and how the evidence from this strand can be used to specifically inform initiatives in your countries or jurisdictions.
Muchas gracias, Sandra. Justo, gracias por esa presentación. Ya hemos visto comunicación y lenguaje.
Thank you for your presentation. We have seen communication and language, and we have seen the evidence in early math or arithmetic. And we would like to highlight that there has also been participation in the platform chat, and they were commenting that We have Boris from Haiti, and he was commenting the context of Haiti, that the information, for example, could be useful for the legislator or the decision makers because or policymakers, because there are certain principles having to do with early childhood, and that could be considered. They also said that the ministry can be using it to regulate the institutions in early childhood in terms of formation, supervision, and accompanying. So thank you very much for that information. I don't know if you would also like to share. If you want to raise your hand, you can share also orally that information. And we also have Rebecca Ramos, who tells us in the chat that this evidence could be shared with the academy, organisms from the government that are responsible in early childhood who work somehow to have updates and feedback that is permanent, to be able to see in a scientific way and not necessarily translate in this evidence in spaces to share and give out strategies, which can also be shared with the families and help them with their children in their homes. Thank you, Rebecca, for your comment as well. I don't know if somebody else would like to open up their microphone or their camera to share with us a little bit of the reactions regarding what Amy and Sandra have shared with us.
Yes, maybe before going to the groups, it would be great here. Yes,
Yes,
What
Vida.
yeah, I was thinking in you, Vida, and also in Grenada, there is also.
Thank you, Raul. Yes,
Right.
Very informative, very interesting. I want to
can
support
introduce
those who
yourself,
have gone.
Vida.
Oh, sorry, Vida George, Early Childhood Coordinator in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Just wanted to say that I want to support those who spoke before me and said that it is quite informative and quite a useful tool. I am noting with interest that as we compare literacy and numeracy, there is limited evidence for numeracy, and I say that with interest because we are now discussing as a region, the difficulties that we are facing with children, children's performance in mathematics as compared to literacy. So I am thinking also that now that we are developing the OECS new harmonized primary curriculum, that we can use it now that it is being piloted. We can use that evidence to help us to solidify what it is that we are doing. I also wanted to ask a question. When we spoke about the 7 months additional progress, can we just get a little more explanation, please, as to how that really translates practically? Thank you.
Amy,
do you want? It's a tricky question. Maybe we can both have a go at it. So in the toolkit, we summarize studies that have effect sizes. So essentially, we have meta-analyzed the effects across those 66 studies, let's say in communication and language, and then we attribute on average a month's progress to a standard deviation. Obviously, this measure itself is quite crude and not contextualized. We know there are lots of limitations with this evidence base in terms of the number of studies and where the studies are conducted. So yeah, it definitely is an estimate that should be used thoughtfully, particularly where we signal that evidence base is weaker. But in essence, it's a way of translating and understanding the potential, I guess, of certain strands. I don't know if you'd add to that, Sandra, at all.
I think you did a very good explanation. It's one of the trickiest thing, and it's where sort of the methodology behind the toolkit really comes into its own space. It was finding a way that could be sort of translatable across strands, across full stages, that can be very visual and easy to understand, but behind it, there's, all of these complexities that Amy mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I also had another question. In terms of access, is it a one-time purchase? Do you purchase for country and then everybody gets to use? Or so, for example, if Ministry of Education purchases, would the University of the West Indies have access, or would the University of West Indies have to purchase separately? And I think it was you or Amy who spoke about early childhood being different in different contexts. So for example, in Dominica, when we speak early childhood, we speak children 0 up to 4+ before they begin formal education. If we have to get the evidence for this cohort, would it be different from, a different purchase for those from 5 to 8? How is this done?
Again, both very good questions. So on the question of the age range within the toolkit, for the early childhood one, we have, I think it's age 2 up to age 5. However, this only represents one subsection of our larger database of studies. So it is possible to do further analysis of other studies with a inclusion criteria of specific age ranges that relate to your own conception of early childhood in your jurisdictions. Obviously, that is like a lot more like resource intensive than simply taking the international evidence we already have on this specific age range, but it is possible, and it is a way of, I guess, contextualizing that resource more deeply. And on your first question, perhaps I will hand over to Suma for that, but our partnership with Suma, in essence, supports the translation of that toolkit for this network. The version that Suma are developing, I understand, includes evidence from Latin America and the Caribbean. And it might be that with that resource as a foundation, there are other different ways of then presenting that evidence in your jurisdiction. But yeah, I mean, as far as I'm aware, the Suma resource will be like a public good for all in this network to use.
Yeah, maybe I can give a word on this, because it's definitely what we want to produce with this kind of discussions dialogue, is like awareness of how the public goods that are out there in the region globally can be not only translated, because that's one part. I mean, this is in English for you directly. But what we do, of course, we will translate it to the rest of the region. But at the same time, and this is more customized, I would say, is the analysis and the search that we do in regards to identifying those pieces of research and evaluations that are directly related to what's happening in the region as a region, but also in the sub-regions. Sometimes we find that there is a gap of knowledge, that there is no research. So of course those the results or findings will foster new research in new areas. So in that sense, it would be very interesting to hear. Here we have people from the University of Guyana, for instance. We have other colleagues from the Caribbean as well. That it would be interesting to discuss a bit about that. Is there a gap of knowledge as well, or do you think that is already covered, or to what extent is covered the research that you have in this level? I don't know if my colleague, any colleague from Suma, because we have, sorry, Ana, no sé si estás acá, pero we've been working in the contextualizations precisely. So we do that kind of research synthesis also in the region, and it's important to say that in Latin America and the Caribbean we have just a few impact evaluations. So is that Amy was referring to incorporate some kind of other research or evaluations that, of course, are rigorous in terms of methodologies, mixed methodologies normally. But of course, we would like to know much more about what's happening in the field in the different countries of the region or sub-regions as well. Or from the team, Pedro, Cata, ustedes han estado también en la contextualización.
You have also been in this contextualization.
Pedro.
Sí, Raúl,
Yes,
ahora
Raúl,
vamos a pasar seguro al tema
we
de
are
la
now going to
contextualización.
go into the
Seguro alguien del equipo de
contextualization
evaluación
theme. So most
de
likely
Suma, sería
somebody
importante que
from the
también nos hable un
evaluation of
poquito
Suma
de este
um,
proceso, ¿no?
who
Del
can share a little
network
bit
y
about
todo este
this
trabajo que estamos haciendo.
process and the
Como
network
tú
and what we have
mencionas,
been
tenemos
doing. And
muchos
when you
participantes también
mention,
de
we have a
universidades,
lot of
¿no?
participants
Y
that are
muchos
also
de
from
ellos,
universities,
al
and
inscribirse
many
al
of
taller,
them,
nos dejaron
when they signed up for this
algunos
workshop, they left
comentarios,
a few
algunas
comments
preguntas,
and
¿no? Por ejemplo,
questions.
por ahí
For
veo a
example,
Silvia, ¿no?
I can see Livia,
Siempre nos acompaña, ¿no?
who
De la
is
Universidad
always
Mariano
with
Galvez de
us
Guatemala.
from the
Por ejemplo, ella nos
University Mariano
preguntaba,
Galvez from
¿no?
Guatemala, and
¿Cómo
she
pueden
was
los programas de
asking,
educación
how
inicial
can the educational
de
programs of
primaria profundizar
early
de manera
childhood in
intencionada
Guatemala strengthen
tanto el desarrollo de habilidades
intentionally
tempranas en
the
comunicación y
development
pensamiento
of early
matemático? Y además
capabilities
teniendo en
in
cuenta
communication and
contextos,
math
¿no?
thinking, and also taking
Multilingües, ¿no?
into
Interculturales,
the
como
context
suele pasar
of
mucho aquí en nuestra región.
multilingual, intercultural, as
Entonces,
what
no sé
usually
si,
happens in
por
this
ejemplo,
region. So
Nidia,
I
te
don't know
gustaría
if, for
complementar un
example,
poquito sobre esta
Nidia, if you
consulta
would like to
para poder
complement regarding this
descentralizar.
question to be able to generate this discussion and dialogue.
O si no, alguien que se pueda animar, ¿no? Porque
Or
esto es algo muy
somebody
particular.
who
En el
can,
Caribe nos han
because this is very
preguntado
particular. In
sobre
Caribbean, they have
cómo
asked us about
ver
how
eso, digamos,
to
con
be able to
estudiantes con
see
alguna
this
discapacidad,
with students
¿no?
with some kind of
Desafiante.
limitation or in
Sería
a
importante que puedan
challenging
traer a la mesa
context.
un
It would
poco
be
esa claridad.
important to bring these issues to the table as well.
También lo podemos hacer en el trabajo en grupo,
And
Pedro.
we can also do this in the
El espacio
work
más pequeño
groups
ayuda
that we
como
are
a
going to
conversaciones
have. Sometimes small
también.
groups help
No sé
conversations
si
to be
alguien más por el
more
chat
lively. I don't know
nos
if
puede
anybody else would also
complementar
like
las
to write in the
preguntas,
chat. We
por si alguien más
place the
se
questions once
anima.
again in case anybody would like to be a part of this dialogue.
Bien. Si no, sería importante,
If
Raúl,
not, it would be
tú mismo que lo has
important,
apuntado,
Raúl,
y no sé si ahí podemos hacer un último enlace para ver
we
este
could
tema
do
de
a
la
last
contextualización,
connection to see this
¿no?
area of
¿Me
the
puedes comentar un poquito
context,
mientras
well,
vamos haciendo el
contextualization, if we can
trabajo
talk about this while
armado del
we
grupo?
carry out
We,
this
we
work
still
of setting
gonna
up the groups.
part of our presentation in terms of sort of some examples. Do you want to go?
Sí, sí, Sandra, podemos ir a los ejemplos justamente
Yes,
para
let's go
aterrizar
to the
en este
examples
proceso de impacto de la
so we
información
can see how this
del toolkit,
information is being used
digamos, en
from the
algunos casos
toolkit
concretos
in
y una
some
vez después
concrete
de eso
cases.
vamos a
And you're
pasar al
right. And
trabajo en
after
grupo.
that, then we will go into the groups.
Así que adelante,
So
Amy y
please go
Sandra,
ahead, Amy and Sandra,
quizás nos puedan presentar estos ejemplos.
if you can share these case studies.
Okay, yeah, just need to unmute myself. Yeah, just before we go into those discussion groups, we thought it would be useful just to give you a bit of a flavour of how EEF has been using evidence from the toolkit to support evidence use in England. And then also just to give you a little bit of a snapshot of how one of the other partners that we work in another system that is very, very different to the English system. So in Cameroon, how they've also been using evidence from the toolkit to support their education system, their families, and their communities. And firstly, I just want to give you a kind of broad overview of the variety of the approaches that EEF uses. And we have partly such a variety because we know that many different things actually influence the behaviour of practitioners and school leaders in England. So it's important for us to look at that system as a whole and think about where are those levers, where are those moments, where are those opportunities really for supporting policymakers, school leaders and teachers. And we really see the foundation of this approach as these accessible resources. So our resources are not behind paywalls, they are on our website. And we know that we have really high usage for them across England. So survey work tells us that like 70% of head teachers in England, for example, use our toolkit. Our guidance reports, I think, have like millions of downloads, which is far more than any research report. So these resources are really well accessed, and that is 100% the foundation of what we do. The toolkit alone as well is not really a resource that can be used to really give that more supportive like guide to practitioners in their everyday practice, which is why alongside that toolkit, we use that database of studies and other research to develop more actionable guidelines for practitioners and for policymakers. So, for example, we might take the findings from a review and then workshop with policymakers and practitioners how that actually applies to their context in England. And we'll write a much more detailed, what we call guidance report to support that. Or we will develop some tools and resources to support that. And Sandra, in just a moment, is going to talk through one of these particularly popular resources in the early childhood space. Secondly, we develop a national and regional partnerships. So we develop partnerships with organisations that we say are in the middle tier in English education. So between the government and between schools, for example, professional development bodies, universities, local government, and so on. And with these partnerships, our aim really is to embed evidence into school improvement priorities and to really ensure that those school improvement priorities are based on what we think is really going to support the outcomes of disadvantaged children in our system. We primarily do this by working on a school-to-school model because we know that schools in England really trust and look to other schools when they're thinking about how to change their practice and how to change outcomes. So it's no use somebody like me from the EEF going in to try and compellingly talk about the evidence base. I haven't had that experience as a classroom practitioner to do that. But what is useful is having a school with a really similar intake of pupils, a school in your local area, and providing you that support, providing you that exemplification. Thirdly, obviously really important, that engagement with policy. One of the ways we have done this in more recent years, and I know that, along with UE, you've been doing this as well in your network, is ensuring that the foundations, the teachers receive in their initial teacher training and through any other kind of government supported accredited teacher development and training frameworks is really underpinned by high quality evidence. So from as soon as they start teaching right through their career life cycle, they have access and are informed by this high quality evidence base. And then finally, ensuring access to structured and rigorously evaluated programs. So Sandra spoke a little bit about the Nuffield early language intervention, which is now probably, apart from teaching at the right level, one of the most well-evidenced programs internationally in education. So, ensuring that schools have access to programs they can pick up and deliver in a certain way, and know that by delivering this program in this way, that they are likely to have that impact on attainment for those children in their settings. And I think the month's progress estimate for Nelly is around 4 or 5 months. Sandra will have to correct me if I'm wrong there, but yeah, a really complementary and effective way to ensure that, alongside school improvement plans, alongside initial teacher training and CPD, alongside improving teacher quality, that you also have these this access to this high quality interventions and support in schools as well. So I'm handing over to Sandra for this next slide.
Thank you, Amy. And it is 4 months. Really good memory. So you'll see on your screen a very simple infographic of an approach developed using funding from the Education Endowment Foundation, but by a group of researchers and teachers here in England. And it's called Shrek. And Shrek might be familiar to you as the cartoon character. So it's a way of remembering it. But really it stands for share attention, respond, expand, and a conversation. And it's an approach that can be used by early years educators as a way to have high quality adult-child interactions and boost or impact children's language and early learning. And I think the story of how this came together, and this is a very popular resource in the early years sector in England. There, if you go to the EF website, you'll see this infographic plus a video of how it looks in action when educators are doing it. And we're also funding an intervention that trains educators in using this approach that looks very simple. But to do it well, you need to have the appropriate training and a professional development. Going back to what Toolkit says, approaches are not just simply delivering. You have to have the right training to be able to implement it in its entirety and for it to have impact. So we're funding an intervention that trains educators in using this approach, and we'll have findings, I think, next year. But so far, it's been, the feedback has been positive, and it's being implemented in over 100 settings in England. So we're hoping to get good findings from that. But how it started a few years ago, and it's a very strong example, in my opinion, of how research evidence can be turned into practical professional development for early years educators. It was developed by a team of researchers that paired together with educators and delivered this intervention over 10 months across 8 early year settings and 6 primary schools in a local area here in London, where we are based. The team started by looking at interventions that are shown to improve children's language outcomes. And in reviewing the evidence, sort of some of those headlines from the toolkit, but digging deeper into the studies and the interventions that the toolkit looks at to get to those headlines, they found that high-quality adult-child conversational interactions can make a significant difference to children's early learning and language development. And from the evidence, they created a menu of 5 different approaches that educators could use in having these high-quality interactions with children. Turn-taking, interactive reading, asking, there was one that's asking one question for every 4 comments. So not just questioning, but also including commenting and expanding on vocabulary. And when they were delivering this intervention in a participatory approach, they found that 5 strategies was too much for educators. So they distilled it down, and refined it until they have this one, the Shrek approach. It's not 5 different things. If you do this one thing, you can do it. You can significantly improve children's learning. And it's as simple as sharing attention, be at the child's level. If you have to sit down, be at the right side, look at what they're looking so that you're in the same attention span. It's really stepping away from other duties and being there with them, responding to their oral language, but also body language, and smiling, nodding. It's just sort of responding so they know that you're there with them. The next thing is sort of expanding. Repeat what the child says, sort of that turn taking, as natural as a conversation is, but not just what they're saying. Also try to add something else. So if they are talking about a red car, you can add things like, oh, that's a very fast red car. So expanding onto that. And if you can include high quality vocabulary, it's also important. And eventually turning into a conversation. So this doesn't happen the first time, but as you do it once again, regularly within your settings, with your children, they start to develop into a conversation that gives them those skills, language, vocabulary, social communication, which are crucial for them to continue on their learning journey throughout their early childhood journey and school. Shrek shows that professional development does not need to be complicated to be effective. Its simplicity relies on the years of research, collaboration, and refinement behind it. It's a model for how evidence-informed practice can improve early learning for children while remaining contextually relevant and scalable. And this is just one example. It didn't come by easily. It was, if you see, and I should have added here, the posters that were before this sort of mnemonic, it was a lot more complicated, and it took that sort of interaction between research, practice, researchers, and educators, actually implementing and applying it in a setting, specific context with specific children, that made it into what it is now, and as successful as it is now. So I hope that sort of gives you a little example, and I'll pass back to Amy.
Thanks, Sandra. And, definitely shows the potential, I think, of the toolkit where you have a strand that is, so broad, like communication and language, but the potential to really chunk down that evidence base and then provide specific support to settings and to educators to use those tiny chunks of the evidence base in their professional practice. The other example I just wanted to share from one of the other systems that we work with, just to give you a bit of a view of how kind of different the options are for when it comes to embedding evidence into your systems, is an approach developed by a partner that we work with called eBase Africa, who are based in Cameroon, but work right across the Lake Chad Basin. And their approach, Evidence Story Day, or Pidgin English for Let's Tell Science Stories, is really based on local traditions and practices around storytelling. They found that in their kind of communities, in their schools, there were particular kind of myths about certain areas of practice, or really limited or no access to some evidence bases. So they really built on this strong culture of storytelling, and they really built on local community networks to develop this 7-step co-constructive model, which involved researchers from eBase Africa. It involved professional storytelling artists, some of which you can see on your screen, presenting at this international conference back in 2023. But they usually, I should say, do this within their different communities across Cameroon under the traditional storytelling trees. So yeah, these researchers and storytellers, along with local community members, or develop these performances based on evidence within the toolkit, for example, to share with local communities, local schools, and so on. And I think this is a nice example. It shows that, the importance of art in research dissemination and mobilization as well. eBase Africa have a lovely quote that they share when talking about this work. And if anyone's interested in this, I'm happy to connect them to eBase. But the quote is that people forget facts but remember stories. I think actually we see that also across, the work of the schools in our network and their storytelling and their exemplification. And, even in that example that Sandra just shared with you there in Shrek, it's about having these short, compelling messages for teachers and for evidence users. Then finally, before we hand over back to the KICS team and the discussion groups, we just wanted, again, for a bit of inspiration to put on your screen some of the different types of stakeholders and approaches that we've seen be involved in evidence mobilization strategies, both at the EEF, but also with that kind of wider network of international partners that include SUMA. Just for kind of inspiration in those conversations when you're thinking about what are those actors and institutions that need to be involved to address certain kind of challenges in your system more efficiently and sustainably when it comes to evidence use. So, everything from national policymakers to teaching unions, teacher trainers, universities, maybe charities, families and communities, and so on. And then when thinking about those models and approaches, you can think about the construction of tools, resources, specific evidence-based programs. Is it initial teacher training or CPD? What are those, approaches that can really best support practice change in your system? I'm happy to stick these in the chat as useful. So that's it from us, and now really looking forward to hearing more from you all.
Muchas gracias, Amy, Sandra.
Thank you so much, Amy and Sandra. Raúl, your hand is raised. Will you participate? Yes. I just wanted to highlight the relevance of what you have presented here. And this last part, when we say that this is the starting point of this work, and when we think in the mid and in the long term, it supposes or it includes the participation of certain institutions and stakeholders. So it's not only that we provide this synthesis in a web platform that it will transform our educational systems. What the experience says, and the experience that we have developed with EEF, is that we have here what works, and how from what works we are able to work and see the development, which are the cases that Sandra and Amy have just presented. This is related to having creating this development with different institutions, with different stakeholders from the communities, from teachers, local authorities, universities, and policymakers, so civil society, of course. I just wanted to highlight that part. We do not think that just offering this platform will trigger transformation. We need a lot of actions and a lot of planning so we can move forward step by step in this process. Thank you, Raúl. And in order to... I'm sorry, Pedro. I have Anna from the assessment team from SUMA. Yes, I was going to ask her to comment a little bit about this. Anna, could you please tell us about this contextualization process that you've been doing from the Early Girls Toolkit? I am Anna Surhoff. I am part of the assessment team. We are in charge of the translation and contextualization, and as Raúl mentioned, in the Latin American and the Caribbean context, we have other types of challenges. The results of impact are lower from what we can find in the evidence from the EF, but there are some other pedagogies or that will there are other methodologies that will enrich these results that will contribute to the reduction of the gaps in our own contexts. And we can also see in some countries, in the Caribbean countries, there are some Latin American countries that have more evidence, and also in terms of inclusion as well. So we want to work on this line, especially in the early years, in order to find out about the evidence that we have in this context in the region. And we also want to invite you in the next workshop that in the next practical workshop that you will have, you tell us about your experiences or ideas about which type of resources or formats can be more useful in order to spread this evidence. And it's not only the synthesis that is there in the platform, but we have to mobilize it so we can have a different impact in the different contexts where we work. Thank you, Anna, for your summary in terms of the contextualization. And now we will start with the practical work. Because participants can tell us a little bit about their countries, how they are using the evidence, if they are being focused in the aspects that Amy and Sandra have just shared. And it is important to listen to you and have a common overview for our plenary. Again, thank you so much, Amy and Sandra, for your participation today, for sharing with us this valuable information about the things that you have been doing from EF, and specifically about the Early Years Toolkit and the concrete use of it. And with this information in mind, we are going to move to the next step, which is the practical working groups, where the participants will be the leaders of this. So we will be divided into conversation rooms organized by the language and the strand. It can be either language and communication or early mathematics. So considering during this strand, we are going to wait for the participants to share their ideas about what their countries face, and they will participate in this reflection and discussion process guided by some questions that are related with each one of these strands identified in this cycle and aligned with the key elements related to the Early Years Toolkit. So we are going to wait for each group to systematize their questions in the slide that you will be assigned in this PowerPoint presentation, and the link is being shared in the platform. Carla, could you please share the link with them? So, based on this information, we will have a plenary in which a representative of each group will share what they discussed and what they elaborated, and will share the idea. In each room, we will have facilitators of the Kickslack team who will help guide the discussion based on cross-cutting questions designed to identify the main challenges and priorities of their countries for incorporating evidence and implementing more efficient, equitable, and sustainable actions. Amy and Sandra will also rotate through the groups to observe the work being done and, if necessary, answer the questions. Now, please, we ask you to participate actively in this space. Turn on your camera so you can have a better interaction. You can work in different aspects about the early childhood and their contexts. So we are going to have 3 groups. Those who speak English and French, you will see that by the name you have in Zoom, you have number 1, number 2. Please stay, those people with number 1, please stay in this room along with the interpreters who will be in the main room. And then Raúl and Vera from the Ministry of Education from Dominique will talk with you. And also, we will have 2 rooms for those who speak Spanish, 1 room for those who have in this their number 3 in their names, and another room for those who have number 4 in their names. One of these groups will be facilitated by Rosa Maria and the other by Catalina. So we will open the group sessions. We will have 35 minutes to share our ideas, and then we'll come back for the plenary. 3 groups. Those with number 1 and number 2 that speak English or French, please stay here with interpreters in the main room. The ones who speak Spanish will be assigned to smaller rooms.
Bien, ya se deben estar abriendo las salas. Solamente se suman a las salas aquellos que hablan
You are
español.
being sent to the different rooms. Only those who speak Spanish are being sent to the rooms. Those who speak French and English, please stay here
Con la facilitación de Raúl y de Vera.
with Raúl.
Hola Catalina, no sé si estoy en la sala correcta. Tengo el número 4. Tiene 4.
Ahora sí. Bueno, vamos a esperar a los que faltan. ¿Pudieron entrar al documento que compartimos en el chat o se los puedo compartir de nuevo también?
Sí, pude entrar.
Súper. Sí, claro.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, it's so great when we see each other. Montserrat is from Suma as well. Hi, Montserrat. Okay, Pedro, if you can share now, because we already have all of them, but would be great if you would like to introduce yourself, Maris, Arbe, Patrina, Charmaine, Nadia.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Marisa Butler, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and I'm the Dean of the Teacher Education Department here. Today, I will be in and out. I have to take my camera off. Tomorrow is our national elections in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and the college actually closes at 12. So I will have to come out of my office because everything would be shut down from today. So, but thank you very much for having me, and I hope you have a great session.
Thank you, Maurice.
Good morning, everyone. Katrina Sukram Charles from Grenada, Ministry of Education, Early Childhood Education Officer. I'm happy to be part of this discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrina.
Good morning, everyone. Charmaine Christopher, Early Childhood Education Officer, Grenada.
Thank you, Charmaine. Great that we have representation from Grenada.
Thanks.
Hervé, voulez-vous...
Ok. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Hervé Bouxico, donc je suis spécialiste en éducation et je fais office de directeur général de l'Office national de partenariat en éducation pour le ministère de l'Éducation nationale en Haïti. Et c'est tout un plaisir de participer à cet atelier avec vous. Et content aussi qu'il y a beaucoup de têtes que je connais très bien.
Excellent, merci, Hervé. Vida, you already introduced yourself, but please.
Okay, so I'll go again. Yes, Vida George, Early Childhood Coordinator in the Ministry of Education here in the Commonwealth of Dominica. Not the Dominican Republic, but the Commonwealth of Dominica in the Windward Islands.
Exactly. Yeah, we will be together with the Vida facilitating, but the idea is for you. Maybe we could start with your first reactions. I know that Patrina, Hervé, you were also commenting before, so maybe we can start with those comments that you were doing, and then we follow up in some of the questions. Sorry, Nadia is there. Whenever you want to introduce yourself, please, Nadia. But Hervé, please. Patrina or Hervé, would you like to start?
Ok, ben, il n'y a pas de souci. Bon, là, c'est ce que j'avais écrit ce matin, c'était justement
Yes, it is a pleasure. What I shared in the chat this morning is that due to the context of Haiti and the priorities that are established by the Ministry of Education regarding improving the quality of education, at the same time, we have this fixation regarding early childhood because we are in a context in which the ministry wants to regulate all institutions that are working on early childhood in Haiti. And at the same time, there is not very much legal material or information so that the minister can carry out a work having to do with guidelines and regulation. That is why I was saying this morning that the tools available can be used by our policymakers because they need to know what are we going to do, what are we going to legislate, and what are we going to place as guidelines to ensure that the early childhood can have a legal framework that will allow us to go forward in the good sense and at the same time take advantage of the good results that we have already obtained. That's the first step. And also, we are in a reform of the curriculum. And this reform should not only cover what happens in the classroom, but it should also begin with what is being carried out in the higher level, in a superior education or higher education, I mean, where it would be important to strengthen the abilities of the professionals to be able to evolve and help the early childhood grow.
Il y a les grands défenseurs
Also,
de beaucoup de groupes, de sous-groupes
there are great
éducatifs,
people who
le
defend
syndicat. Donc, il me semble aussi que
who
au lieu
defend
de
education,
toujours
groups and
voir un
subgroups
syndicaliste
within the
comme étant
education system. We have the
un
unions, and I
quelqu'un qui
always
fait du
see
bruit
the
ou quelqu'un qui parle
union
beaucoup, c'est surtout de
workers
le voir
as
comme un
people
technicien qui
who
sert
make a
à la
lot of
fois de
noise
construire
or
des idées
maybe
et en
make
termes de
problems, but for
construire
me,
des
I think
plans
it's
d'action, en
important
termes de
to
construire
consider
des
them as
marches à suivre,
technical personnel who
s'assurer que
build
les professionnels
ideas and action
qu'ils soient
plans and
innocents,
steps.
ce sont des
So to
professionnels
ensure that the
qui possèdent de
professionals
très bonnes compétences
who
et
are
en
in
plus ce
charge
savoir-faire
can
et tout ce
have
travail à un
the
moment donné sur
abilities that are
l'intelligence et
adequate or
même
the
amélioration des
capabilities to be able
compétences
to
à tous les
carry out
niveaux,
their
c'est
work.
aussi des
And if at
outils qui
some
se peuvent
time we need to
déjà
work on the
nous
condition of the
assurons
teachers and improve
que
their
les
work
gens sont
conditions, the
informés,
unions
que le
offer
cadre
tools to
légal
be
est
able to
bienveillant
say
et les législateurs ont pris de
and
bonnes
make sure
décisions.
that
Et
these
puis, nous
people
avons
are
des
have the
professionnels
training, they are
compétents et
trained
nous exigeons
adequately, and that they have the
qu'ils soient
legal
toujours de telle
framework,
manière.
and that we
Donc,
have
c'est pour vous
competent
dire que
professionals, and that
c'est pour
our
moi l'ensemble
requirements,
des
and that they can
acteurs
respond to our requirements.
qui sont
For me,
concernés
this
par ces
group of
outils par rapport à
players
leur niveau de responsabilité dans le secteur.
is
Et pour le
are
reste,
the objective of
je
these
ne suis pas sûr,
tools
là je le cadre,
regarding the
parce que
level
c'est
of
des questions, c'est surtout
responsibility in the
l'histoire de la
sector.
recherche scientifique de
I
ce,
cannot
de cet
go
aspect
into
qui
too
est,
much
qui fait vraiment partie
into
de
the framework
l'évaluation
because it would take me
scientifique.
on to the next question, but the weight of
Et
in
c'est au moment
scientific
venu,
research is
je peux en
very
parler s'il n'y a
important.
pas d'autres personnes qui veulent prendre la parole tout de suite.
I can I I can talk about this
Merci,
more if there's
Hervé.
people who don't want to speak at this time.
I'm gonna switch as well, français and anglais. But when you talk about the regulatory frameworks, I think that that's very important from the highest level discussion at the political level, but also at the policy in terms of curriculum reforms and also the incorporation of the unions as professionals in our country. So that the case in Haiti. Yeah, very, very important to know what's the context and the setting in that country. Vida, would you like to move on with the questions also for the participants? Do we have the questions? I don't see. I missed Vida. Are you with us, Vida? Yeah, I think something happened with your camera. Here, yeah, I see the questions now. Sorry, my Zoom was not working very well. So, colleagues, here are a few questions. I don't know, Maris, I know you have to leave soon, or you already left, but I would love to hear from Grenada too. Patrina, you also put some of the comments. Maybe you can connect with these questions regarding the evidence and how that could be useful to understand the issue in our context. Grenada, Patrina or Charmaine?
Okay, good morning again. In terms of for us in Grenada, I don't think we have the evidence as collecting data in terms of the performance of our early learners in literacy and numeracy. We probably have at certain grade levels. For example, we have the EGRA results for the grade 1, so across the country, so that can be a starting point. But I think if we had to make any decision in terms of to know where we are, we probably would have to do try to gather that data in terms of for maybe the different levels at the early grades, maybe starting from kindergarten. But I believe that if we are to make any decision, we must have the data, which would be critical.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Maurice here, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. As I said, I had to leave the building because everything has been shut down in preparation for elections tomorrow. So I'm sitting in my car. Like my colleague in Dominica, I think our main problem might be lack of the evidence. That is question number one. Is there national or regional evidence? Whatever data that might exist in St. Vincent and Grenadines regarding early childhood and levels of literacy would not be exactly my purview. That would be from the Ministry of Education. I think that I have seen data regarding literacy levels in the National Educational Digest. So there might be something. I sincerely doubt that there's no evidence at all. So there should be something in the Educational Digest. That is something that I probably need to look into. The Ministry of Education would also have information regarding literacy levels and numeracy levels in early childhood, as a baseline examination is typically done with children at kindergarten level before they move on to grade 1. So there will be some evidence. I suspect though, and I suspect strongly that evidence may not be as in depth or have the scope that we would have. But I think that we would have some. It's just a matter of, trying to locate it. I'm just going to run down very quickly to number 2. What additional support might key actors and institutions need to address the issue more efficiently and sustainably? Again, probably better record keeping. And I know that research is being carried out. I know that data is being collected, but it's probably just a matter of having in-depth data and keeping it in a repository so that we all have access to it very quickly, and we can use that evidence to make decisions such as we were talking about in the meeting today. And the final question: how can we ensure that the proposed solutions prioritize closing gaps and benefit vulnerable groups, children in rural areas, from indigenous communities with disability, migrants living in poverty, etc.? I think that I think might be an area that we would have to think about. Right now, our energies are focused on ensuring that there is quality teacher education, early childhood education across St. Vincent and Grenadines. The government of St. Vincent and Grenadines is doing that by having early childhood centers built onto existing primary schools. So I think the next level now would be to attempt to ensure that vulnerable groups, as identified here, disabilities and so on. But I think right now the effort is attempting to make sure that early childhood education is accessible for every child, regardless of background, and so on. But to deal with the vulnerable ones, I think that might have to be the next step. I hope that I was clear and I didn't confuse the issue any further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maurice, for that complete answer. Yes, you were very clear. I think accessibility would be one of the, as you said, the early childhood accessible for every child, and of course that means the most vulnerable as well. Vida, I'm worried because my concern is that nobody's taking notes. Is it possible that someone can just go into the link and write some of the ideas? Vida,
I noticed we did not select a scribe, so I tried taking notes, but at one point in time I got cut off. I don't know what happened.
yeah,
I
no,
just got cut off from the meeting.
I guess.
Was that everybody?
Pardon me?
Was that everybody? Because I got cut off for a brief moment.
Yeah, we realized that. No, I was just saying that maybe we can, if you can take some of the notes of the colleagues are mentioning.
No problem. Okay.
Excellent.
But even as I am speaking, I can also maybe just add to the
yeah,
discussion.
I would like to hear from you from the experience of Dominica as well.
Yes, in Dominica. Well, as I said, it's a great tool. Like my colleague said from Grenada, lack of evidence. One of our, our shortfalls is research. Really, capturing data and, working with evidence. So I think that would really help us in the region and help us in Dominica. In terms of additional support, well, I should also say that we have the OECS digest, so maybe the statistician would have more information than I do, right, regarding evidence. But I think we still need to strengthen our collection of data, so that would help us. Like the speakers before me, I think it is important that we have this information to help to convince our policymakers, because even for me in Dominica, my early childhood policy is in draft. And maybe, if I have supporting evidence, then I can get it to be rationalized. In terms of how can we ensure that the proposed solutions are prioritized? So for us in Dominica, we are also increasing access for early childhood from 2012. We are constructing early childhood centers, pre-kindergartens more specifically, to the primary schools, next to the primary schools, and trying to increase access for children. I can say that out of our 45 primary schools, we already have 32 of these primary schools having early childhood centers. And in terms of vulnerable groups, we can maybe safely say that most of our centers are in the rural districts. And we also take into consideration our indigenous groups. So we do have one already established in the Kalinago territory and one that is right now being established. We are faced with a challenge, though. We do have now a number of children who are being, observed to be at risk for early childhood special education, and we are limited in that area as to how to assist them. So it's important so our caregivers, practitioners to be trained in that area. We do have an office of special education, but with limited staff. We only have one officer and some supporting staff. So for us in Dominica, I think the toolkit will be of great importance.
Yeah, that's very. Please.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thanks. Oh, can I
Of course.
come in, Ro? I was looking for the hand raise function. For some reason, I can't see it on my screen. Sorry for being inept. Yeah, I mean, just like reflecting on what some of the participants have said so far, particularly around the challenge around national data sets, and definitely hear that this is, one way we can really strengthen kind of data and evidence and research use within our systems. I don't know if it's helpful to share a bit more about some of the regional work we do in England in light of these challenges of having maybe like limited access to national level data, where we are working with a smaller group of schools. So rather than using that national level data, we're using kind of the data that schools are producing themselves. This doesn't have to be, super high quality collected data. We mean everything from, maybe like a teacher's understanding of the behavior challenges in their school, the teacher's understanding of the challenges within the local community and the opportunities and the strengths of that local community. So thinking about different types of evidence as really important data for that like diagnosis phase. Obviously this is really challenging when you're designing like a national scale initiative, but if you want to strengthen individual early childhood centres or a group of early childhood centres, let's say, in specific kind of smaller geographies within a region or a local area, there are ways to think about potentially what is that kind of rich understanding and data that schools like already have about their students and their communities.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah, very, very important. I remember I was at some point visiting the experience of Scotland and definitely working at the school level or the network of schools in the same community can make a big difference as well in terms of collecting data, monitoring progress, and so on and so forth. Yeah, thank you so much. I see. I'm not sure if Nadia, you're with us. I understand, Nadia, you're coming from St. Lucia. I'm not sure if Nadia is. No. If not.
So if I should just add, Rahul, in terms of the additional support, I'm thinking that we must start with building teacher capacity because we have a lot happening in education at this time, and we do not want the teachers to feel so overwhelmed with a lot of new things happening. So, and this would certainly call for a change in mindset with this new approach. So I'm thinking that we must have some building capacity sessions, professional development for our teachers and other stakeholders. For us in Grenada, question number 3, in terms of access, I don't think we have much of a challenge with access. However, in terms of closing the gap and benefiting the vulnerable groups, my concern here would be the children after school when there is no school, meeting them somewhere in terms of the community. So probably we may want to look at community outreach programs that would continue along that line, or maybe community camps, literacy camps, if you wish to call it like that, or numeracy camp, where the learning would continue in the communities. Thank you.
Yeah, very important what you were just mentioning, Patrina, is something that actually we are discussing with the Ministry of Education in Grenada, the possibility to adapt and contextualize some of the initiatives, innovation that has been proving effect precisely in early literacy and numeracy in the region and worldwide. As you know, probably that kind of program, such as the teaching at the right level, that can be contextualized and adjusted to the context, that could be within the school schedules, but also go beyond that as part of the after school time. Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Raul, sorry, the interruption. We have a couple of minutes to go to the plenary session. So maybe we can make some final remarks.
That could be, yeah, interesting maybe to define who, maybe Vida. Vida, would you like to summarize a bit the discussion on the plenary?
No problem.
Excellent, excellent. And maybe to come back to any kind of comment regarding the topic that Patrina was mentioning, which is so important, the initial teacher education programs or in-service programs for professional development of teachers. Is there any need in the countries as well? Dominica, St. Vincent, of course, Maurice is working in initial teacher education programs. Would you add
For
something?
us in Dominica, we have partnered with the University of the West Indies, and so we are offering this 2-year certificate program for teachers in the early years. But we also have the Dominica State College, which offers training for teachers in primary and secondary, at the primary and secondary levels.
Like Dominica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines works along with the University of the West Indies to offer an associate degree in early childhood. We also, again, in conjunction with the University of the West Indies, Caville campus, we offer a B.Ed. This it's not offered in every cycle, but depending on the needs of the Ministry of Education, the B.Ed is offered in early childhood.
I think we missed you. Maris,
B.Ed programs.
I think we lost you in the last 30 seconds.
Okay. At what point did you lose me? What was I saying?
No, you were referring to the programs. Vida, sorry.
Yes, she was speaking about the B.Ed program when we lost her.
Right. So so let me just run it through very quickly again. So at the SVGCC, we offer, can you hear me though?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. For the associate degree that everybody in the OECS knows, the associate degree in conjunction with.
No, Maris, your connection is unstable now, unfortunately.
Raúl, justo ya estamos regresando ya a la sala principal.
Okay, we're coming back to the main room. We closed the groups, so maybe
Offer and plan to offer. Hello?
Sorry, Maris, but your connection is very unstable, and we are all back in the plenary.
Out of time. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay, but Vida will make the effort to summarize what we heard from you. Thank you, Maris. De vuelta aquí estamos, Pedro.
Listo. Muchas gracias.
Okay, so here we are. Thank you so much, Raúl. I think this has been very useful. Welcome, everyone. We are in the main room now for the final moment of our workshop. We hope that this conversation moment, exchange, has been useful for you, and you have been able to share your own experiences. Now we're going to close about the commonalities and particularities of the KICSLAC countries, reflecting on the interaction between the tools explored, such as the evidence included in the Early Years Toolkit, and the main challenges in the early childhood education. To do this, we will invite a spokesperson from each group to briefly share, in 2 or 3 minutes, their key ideas from their group. We will begin with the Spanish-speaking groups, and then Sandra will offer some comments and reflections, and following this, we will continue with the English-French groups, and also Amy could offer a few final comments. So I'm going to share my screen now. Each representative of the group could comment about the main things mentioned. We are going to start with the third group. That's a Spanish group that was mainly based in the arithmetics strand. I think Elma Barahona from Honduras is the representative. Yes, I can hear you well. Okay, so we had a conversation with people from El Salvador, and in the priorities that we shared that one of the challenges that we have in this stage is this think about methodologies, having effective methodologies that are useful for this early childhood education. And then the collaborative work with families, and also the revision of the books, what is working or not. And we were reflecting that how was it possible that a child who is 5 years old would say that they don't like maths. So children tell us these things, but we are not listening to them. So there is this important work that we have to do about this. In terms of evidence, in Honduras, I don't know if there is evidence. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Catalina is giving me this task so I can map this. In El Salvador, they have a focus in the evaluation, in the assessment of learnings, but specifically in terms related to methodology that work best. The colleague didn't know that there was this methodology about this. In terms of additional support, we would like to have an integration of this evidence ecosystem to see what the different actors are doing, and then we can set some action lines that have an impact in the most vulnerable populations. If we are not clear about how this works, how the evidence works, who are involved in this, what are they using, we won't be able to progress in this, and that's an interesting work that we can do. That's what I can say from my group. Thank you, Elma, for this intervention, because during the workshop you have participated a lot and you have shared the vision of what you have discussed. Let's move to the next group that was focused on the communication and language strand. Who is the speaker here? I am Carla Rodriguez. Hi, Carla. We reached this conversation mainly from the real distances between different countries in terms of the articulation or governance of the different educational levels. We see the need before the process that Amy and Sandra have done of having this repository. We have seen that need of having this information consolidated. Today, we don't see an evidence of the impact of different projects in these early childhood education years, because the educational model that we are developing from KICS is still in a systematization process. Our project is based on the dialogue learnings in rural educational centers with a gender focus. In terms of what is needed, we need to have the teachers trained for this, because that is a deficiency that we have in the different countries that are in this training process, but in active teachers, they are not preschool teachers. So that's why we have this deficiency. We need changes in the curricula that have also been made in Honduras, this curricular update, to promote these dialogue spaces, to create this horizontality between teachers and children. in order to create communication spaces, like equal or even communication spaces through reading, dialogue reading. And in this way, the teacher may perceive if the teacher may perceive if the child is acquiring the skills, and also creating instruments that will allow us to evaluate the learnings if the children are developing those capacities, to guarantee that proposals are solutions to close the gaps, that is to adapt the materials, that the proposals of the different projects and initiatives have these cross-cutting matters included. Let's say, for example, from the original people, these efforts to reduce, for example, in Honduras, for example, it's not mandatory to have the children in the school in the first 3 years, and some parents decide to send children only for 1 year, and that's a complicated issue. We need to close the gaps, and we don't need to widen the gaps. For example, I was talking about these technologies issues. As in the rural areas, there is less access to connectivity. We create an advantage for the urban teachers, but for the rural teachers, that is a disadvantage. So we widen the gap. That's in general terms. You can check what we have just written. You can have access to our comments. For a final balance of the Spanish groups, I don't know, Sandra, if you may want to give us a few words from your end. I was only in one with Carla, and I think it was a very interesting thing to listen. When we see the difference in context, I'm speaking in Spanish. That's a surprise for everyone. And the differences between England and those who work in the early childhood education sector. And what happens in the other countries, such as Honduras and the countries from KICS, they have identified, or there is this. I'm sorry, there is this identification of the barriers. They are aware of contextualizing the learning process of language. We didn't talk about this in the toolkit presentation because I think it's very important that it's not only talked, as the slide says, it's not only talked in rigid contexts. We have to give children different contexts so they can apply the words depending on when they are, on their realities, on their contexts. And this resonated a lot from what we have seen in England. And also an important thing about not widening the socioeconomic gap from the students. That's a most important mission in EEF, and that's really important or present in Honduras, to be aware that when they are implementing interventions that are related to parents and mothers or with technology, those can be interventions that will benefit those who have higher socioeconomic levels because they have access to technology, more school education, they understand what they are being taught. So it's important to give the relevant support to those who need it and not to leave them unattended and unserved and in the worst situation. So more than a reflection is, I think it's really interesting to listen to the complexities that we share and the efforts that are being made from the different organizations, governmental organizations, educational organizations, to assure the best education for children. Thank you.
Perfect, Sandra. Thank you very much. And that is the idea, that you can bring that information, this evidence, and this effort of making a match with the challenges in the region, in the countries, with the priorities of the region and the country, and that you can see how valuable that this look is, and looking in the context, and to see also hand in hand the process of Anna as she was commenting, to make an effort to be able to have the context of each one of the toolkit. So now we are going to go with Vera, and she is going to give us a summary of what we have discussed in the English and French group. Vera, are you there?
Yes, I am. Are you hearing me?
Sí, Vera, te escuchamos. En un par de minutos quizás nos puedas comentar un poco lo conversado.
Yes, we can hear you. If you could just share in just a few minutes, what we talked about.
Okay, then. Thank you very much. So in our group, well, on a whole, we agreed that the evidence is important and beneficial to us as a region. For 1 minute, I got cut off, so I am trying to report on what it is that I capture within the moment. So, for example, in Haiti, I want to be specific because Haiti is saying that right now they are working on regularizing what is happening within the early childhood sector, but they lack legislation. And for them, they are thinking that this toolkit will be very supportive in helping them to convince the policymakers to take the necessary action. They are also looking at reforming their curriculum, and they are thinking that for reforming curriculum is not only about what happens in the classroom, but ensuring that the teachers are trained. So they are also thinking that that can assist them in training, helping them with professional development. He made a very interesting point about the unions, and I laugh when he said that unions maybe usually just talk, talk, talk. So he's thinking that this toolkit will help the unions to concretize what it is that they are pushing forward, give them the evidence that they can use, and maybe assist teachers in really becoming professionals, right, and assisting the whole sector for the early childhood. But one of the challenges that the entire region had was research. So in terms of research, everybody agrees that we need to do a little more and close the gap in terms of capturing our own evidence. Although for us, we may have the OECS digest, but research remains a major concern for us in the region. And for the vulnerable groups, well, for us, in some countries, early childhood is not compulsory, so parents do not always send their children to the centers. There is need for professional development, really increasing our offerings. For some, we are partnering with the University of the West Indies, but there remains still a gap in ensuring that our early childhood practitioners are properly trained. There is also need for additional programs for children after they have left the centers. What happens to them when they leave the centers and they go into the communities? Can we have some community-based programs for these children to ensure continuity? Because we know when the children leave the centers, not all parents are able to support them. And so we need to use this evidence to increase our offerings for children after they have left the centers. For St. Vincent, they are working on they have an associate degree and a B.Ed with Cave Hill, but I did not get what was happening because her connectivity was interrupted. So in a nutshell, that is where we are. I think I have captured most of what I heard. As I said, I was cut off for a brief moment.
No te preocupes, Vera. Más bien, muchísimas gracias. Has hecho un gran trabajo de síntesis.
Don't worry, you have done a great job. Thank you for your summary, and you have captured the most important part of each representative. And now, to be able to close, Amy, would you like to give a few words for the final minutes? Just a few closing words?
Yeah, and I'll be brief because I know we're a bit over time. And I guess from me, I think my reflection maybe is more of a challenge or a question to you, which I know is like an annoying reflection. But really like around, what do you think of as a network when you talk about evidence. So research evidence, like we have in the toolkit, is just like one type. It's impact evidence, it's causal evidence. It can give us this like broad overview and help us kind of guide what maybe area of practice or approach we're selecting when we want to support our schools or our system. But there's lots of other forms of really like rich evidence out there. We had some discussion in our group about the importance of national data sets and so on. But there are like other forms of evidence that can be collected or interpreted at like a school level or like a local community level as well, that can really support that like implementation. So evidence from a focus group with teachers, let's say, or a teacher's understanding of their pupils, their children, their local communities, what their strengths are when it comes to behavior, when it comes to attendance, and when it comes to learning. And if we can support schools to understand this, we can support them and empower them to also kind of be change makers in their own practice. So a question for you and how you're thinking about evidence, and don't have to like answer it now, but I just thought it was important to reflect on that as part of these discussions.
Perfecto, Amy. Muchas gracias. Creo que es muy interesante justo
Perfect, Amy.
terminar
Thank you very much. I
también
think
con
it's very
una,
interesting
con
to
una
end
pregunta que nos
also
deja
with a
como tarea
question
para
that
más
gives us this
adelante seguir
homework
reflexionando al
to
respecto.
continue reflecting
Esto
regarding
es algo que está en lo que cada
this.
uno de nosotros viene
And this
realizando.
is something that
Entonces,
all of
creo
us
que
have
no
been
se solamente
carrying out. So I think it's
la
very
pregunta que
pertinent
lanzas,
to
podríamos
have this
coloquialmente
question that
poner
you
las tareas
gave
que se
us,
están en el área, ¿no?
and you kind of leave it just kind of
Entonces,
bouncing here
vamos
in
a
our
ver
area, and
cómo,
the
cómo
ball is in
nosotros
our
asumimos ese
court. So
desafío.
now we
Creo que
are
es
going to see
interesante
how we take on this
soñar
challenge.
justamente
And I think it's
cómo,
interesting
cómo
to
se
also see
percibe y la
how this is
vivencia, el tipo de
perceived and how
vivencia
the
y
evidences and the types of
visibilidad
evidence,
para
and
diferentes
finally
escenarios, ¿no?
its
Considerando
use for the
también
different
aspectos
scenarios,
sociopolíticos
and considering
y
each
más complejos que
context, the
tenemos
social
en
political
Latinoamérica y el Caribe. Así que
situation,
muchas
and the
gracias.
complexity of Latin America and the
Tomémoslo,
Caribbean.
bueno,
So thank you very
nuevamente
much. And
agradecer a cada
now
grupo de
I would just
trabajo
like
por
to
haber
thank each
compartido
work
estos
group
puntos
for
relevantes.
sharing these relevant points.
Y antes de cerrar,
And
queremos
before we
recoger también
close, we just
brevemente
wanted
sus
to
impresiones sobre el evento
also
desarrollado
know a
y las
little bit of
dinámicas
your
abordadas.
impression
Por
regarding what
eso
we
les
have been
vamos a
carried
pasar
out
en
and
el
the
chat
theme that
un
we
enlace a
chose.
una pequeña
So we are
encuesta
going to
para que
leave
ustedes
a
puedan
link
llenarla.
for a
Para
survey
nosotros
or
es
a
muy
poll
importante conocer su
so you can
opinión
fill that out,
y lo
because
que
for
nos
us it's
permitirá
very
seguir
important to know
mejorando,
your opinion,
¿no?
and this will also help
Ahora
us
sí, para cerrar
continue
esta jornada, queremos
improving. And now to
agradecer
close,
no
we would like
solamente,
to
¿no?, a todo el
thank
equipo de
the
Legislation
team
Development
deeply,
Foundation y
the
especialmente a Amy y Sandra,
EEF, especially Amy and
a los y
Sandra,
las colegas que
and
facilitaron esta
the
elaboración
colleagues who have
grupal,
been facilitating each
especialmente a
work
Veda
group,
George,
especially Vida
y al equipo de
George,
interpretación
and the
también, por supuesto,
interpretation
todas las
team as
personas que
well.
participaron
All of you
activamente
who have been
en este
participating
taller.
here actively
Este
in this
espacio,
workshop,
como saben, ha formado
in this
parte del
space. And as
proceso
you know, we
pasante
have been part of a
que estamos
broader
desarrollando
process that
durante
we are
todo el
developing
2025, que es este
throughout all
ciclo
of
de movilización y
2025, which is
conocimiento,
this
en alianza
mobilization
con
of
nuestros
knowledge
socios regionales y
cycle in
globales.
alliance with our
Estaremos en
regional
contacto
and
con ustedes
global
muy pronto
partners. So we will
para
be in
compartir el
contact with
resto de
you
la
soon to be
exposición,
able to
los
share
materiales,
a
así como
summary
los
of this
próximos pasos.
material,
Estén
the
atentos
session,
y
the
atentas
material, as
al
well as next
lanzamiento
steps.
de
So
nuestro
please
próximo ciclo de movilizaciones
be
conocimiento y
aware that we
experiencia
will be
que
soon
desarrollaremos a lo
launching
largo de la
our new
semana siguiente.
cycle of mobilization of knowledge about
Ahora sí,
teacher
bueno,
policy, which we
muchísimas
will be
gracias por su
developing throughout
tiempo, por su
2026.
compromiso e interés
So thank you
en
very much
seguir
for your
fortaleciendo la
time,
educación de
for
los
your
niños
commitment and
y niñas en nuestra
interest,
región
to be able
desde
to
los primeros
continue
años.
strengthening
Hasta una
our
próxima
children
oportunidad.
in
Muchísimas
our
gracias.
region from their early childhood. So we will see you soon. Thank you
Bye.
very much.
Welcome. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Bye.